The observation deck of the Galactic Council's primary research vessel hummed with the soft vibrations of its quantum engines as I adjusted my sensory apparatus for the third time that cycle. My name is Zefkar, and I serve as a xenobiological analyst for the Council's Deep Space Reconnaissance Division. For the past 2 standard rotations, our mission had been simple: observe and catalog the military capabilities of the species humanity had recently made contact with. What I witnessed that day would forever change my understanding of warfare, survival, and the terrifying potential that lurked within seemingly peaceful beings. The human vessel approached our position with deliberate caution, its hull scarred from what appeared to be recent combat. Intelligence reports indicated they had been engaged in a territorial dispute with the Krexnor hegemony, a militant faction known for their ruthless efficiency in battle. The Krexnor were considered among the most formidable warriors in our sector, standing nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating and redundant organ systems that made them incredibly difficult to kill. Captain Veltash, our mission commander, activated the long-range scanners as the human ship settled into a defensive position near the asteroid field we were using for cover. Analyst Zefkar, she clicked through her translator device. Prepare your equipment for detailed behavioral observation. The humans have agreed to demonstrate their combat capabilities against a simulated Krexnor assault force. I positioned my recording arrays and neural monitoring equipment, expecting to document what would likely be a brief but educational display of human military doctrine. The simulation would involve holographic projections and tactical scenarios, designed to test their response times and strategic thinking. What I did not anticipate was the raw, primal intensity that humans brought to even simulated warfare. The first wave of holographic Krexnor fighters materialized around the human vessel, their distinctive wedge-shaped hulls gleaming with simulated weapons fire. I watched through my enhanced visual sensors as the human ship suddenly transformed from a peaceful exploration vessel into something altogether more frightening. Weapon ports that had been hidden beneath retractable hull plating snapped open with mechanical precision, and the ship's entire configuration shifted into what could only be described as a predatory stance. But it was not the technology that unsettled me. It was the humans themselves. Through the ship's transparent observation ports, I could see the crew moving with a fluidity and purpose that seemed almost choreographed. Their faces, normally calm and pleasant during our previous diplomatic encounters, had taken on expressions of focused intensity that made my exoskeleton plates contract involuntarily. These were not the same beings who had shared meals with us and discussed art and philosophy just days before. The human captain, a female named Sarah Chen, began issuing commands in rapid succession. Her voice carried through the communication channels we were monitoring, and I noticed how her tone had shifted from the warm, diplomatic cadence I was accustomed to into something sharp and commanding. Target priorities established. Williams, I want firing solutions on the lead destroyers. Rodriguez, prepare for evasive pattern Delta 7. All hands to combat stations. What followed was 43 minutes of the most brutal and efficient destruction I have ever witnessed. The humans did not simply engage the holographic enemy forces, they dismantled them with a systematic ferocity that defied every peaceful first impression they had made. Their ship moved through the simulated battlefield like an apex predator, striking with pinpoint accuracy before vanishing into the asteroid field, only to emerge from an entirely different vector to deliver another devastating assault. I documented everything, but my analysis equipment kept registering readings that seemed impossible. The humans were experiencing massive spikes in adrenaline production, elevated heart rates, and increased neural activity in regions associated with aggression and tactical planning, yet their movements remained coordinated and precise. They were simultaneously in a state of controlled fury and clinical calculation. During one particularly intense sequence, a simulated Krexnor boarding party materialized inside the human vessel's cargo bay. I watched through internal sensors as a squad of human Marines engaged the holographic enemies in close-quarters combat. The humans moved like liquid violence, flowing around obstacles and striking with weapons that seemed inadequate against Krexnor armor, yet somehow proved devastatingly effective. One Marine, a young male named Jackson, found himself cornered by 3 simulated Krexnor warriors. Instead of retreating or calling for assistance, he smiled. The expression was not one of joy or humor, but something far more disturbing. He adjusted his grip on his weapon and charged directly at the nearest enemy, using the creature's own momentum against it to send it crashing into its companions. "Did you record that?" Captain Veltash asked, her voice tight with what I recognized as concern. "Yes, Captain. All biometric data is being stored for analysis." I paused, reviewing the readings. "Captain, these humans are not fighting like any species I have studied. They appear to be enjoying the combat." This observation proved correct as the simulation continued. The humans demonstrated tactical innovations that our military strategists had never conceived. They used their environment as a weapon, turning asteroids into projectiles and exploiting the gravitational fields of nearby planets to slingshot their vessel into attack positions that should have been impossible to achieve. When the simulation finally ended, with every holographic enemy destroyed or disabled, the human vessel returned to its original peaceful configuration. The weapon ports retracted, the hull plating sealed, and the ship once again appeared to be nothing more than an exploration vessel. But I had seen what lay beneath that facade, and the knowledge filled me with a deep instinctual dread. Captain Chen's voice came through the communication array, warm and friendly once again. "Thank you for allowing us to participate in your tactical assessment. We hope the data proves useful for your research. Would you like to join us for dinner this evening? Our chef has prepared something special from Earth cuisine." I stared at the sensors, unable to reconcile the cheerful invitation with the systematic destruction I had just witnessed. These beings could shift from peaceful diplomats to efficient killers in a matter of moments, and then return to offering hospitality as if nothing had occurred. "Captain," I whispered to Veltash, "I believe we have made a serious error in our assessment of human capabilities." She studied the tactical data scrolling across her display screens, her antenna twitching with agitation. "Indeed, Analyst Zefkar, I fear we have underestimated not just their technology, but their fundamental nature." As our vessel prepared to return to Council space, I compiled my preliminary report. But how could I adequately convey what I had observed? How could I explain that humanity possessed a capacity for violence that seemed to coexist perfectly with their capacity for kindness and creativity? The implications were staggering, and I suspected that the consequences of this knowledge would extend far beyond a simple military assessment. The journey back to Council Prime took 18 standard cycles, and every moment of that time I spent reviewing the combat recordings, trying to understand what I had witnessed. Sleep became elusive as my mind replayed scenes of human Marines moving through simulated combat zones with a grace that seemed impossible for bipedal creatures of their size and apparent fragility. My research assistant, a young Velnari named Krikstal, found me in the analysis chamber during what should have been my rest period. Her crystalline features reflected the holographic displays surrounding us as she approached with obvious concern. "Analyst Zefkar, you have not left this chamber for 3 cycles. Your metabolic readings indicate severe stress patterns." She gestured toward the floating displays showing human biometric data. "Perhaps you should consider delegating some of this analysis work." I rotated my primary visual organs toward her, noting how the combat footage playing in the background caused her to instinctively step away from the screens. "Krikstal, have you reviewed the psychological profiles we compiled on the human crew members before the combat demonstration?" "Yes, sir. Standard peaceful exploration psychology, curiosity-driven cooperative social structures, low aggression markers." "Why do you ask?" I manipulated the holographic controls to display 2 sets of biometric readings side by side. These are the same individuals. The readings on the left were taken during our diplomatic dinner, 3 cycles before the demonstration. The readings on the right are from yesterday's combat simulation. Krikstal's crystalline body flickered with the pale blue light that indicated confusion among her species. "This cannot be accurate. These readings suggest 2 entirely different psychological profiles." "That is precisely the problem," I replied, feeling my exoskeleton plates shifting with agitation. "We are not dealing with a species that becomes aggressive when threatened. We are dealing with a species that has weaponized aggression while maintaining complete psychological stability." I activated another set of recordings, these showing the human Marine named Jackson during his encounter with the simulated Krexnor warriors. Watch his facial expressions during combat. Note the dilation of his pupils, the micro-expressions around his mouth and eyes. As the recording played, Krixtal's body grew dimmer with each passing moment. He appears to be experiencing pleasure from the combat situation. Not just pleasure, I corrected. Watch more carefully. He is calculating, planning, and enjoying the tactical challenge simultaneously. This is not bloodlust or rage-induced violence. This is warfare as art form. The implications of this discovery had kept me awake through multiple rest cycles. Every species the Council had encountered fell into predictable categories when it came to conflict resolution. There were the naturally aggressive species who fought with passion and fury. There were the defensive species who fought only when cornered. And there were the strategic species who approached warfare as a mathematical problem to be solved. Humans appeared to be all three simultaneously. Continued my analysis as our vessel approached the outer perimeter of Council space. The more I studied the recordings, the more disturbing patterns emerged. During the combat simulation, the humans had demonstrated tactical innovations that suggested they had been thinking about warfare on levels that other species simply did not reach. When Captain Chen had ordered evasive pattern Delta 7, I had initially assumed this was a standard defensive maneuver. Further analysis revealed that the pattern was actually an offensive trap, designed to draw enemy forces into a position where they could be eliminated with maximum efficiency while minimizing human casualties. The humans had dozens of such patterns, each one optimized for different combat scenarios. But what truly unsettled me was the discovery that these patterns were not taught in human military academies. They had been developed through what humans called war games, competitive simulations that their civilian population engaged in for entertainment. Their children played strategic conflict scenarios for fun, unknowingly developing tactical skills that professional soldiers of other species trained for years to master. Krixtal reviewed my analysis data with growing alarm. Analyst Zefkar: if these conclusions are accurate, then humanity represents a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. I nodded, my sensory stalks drooping with fatigue and worry. Indeed, but that is not the most concerning aspect of our discovery. What could be more concerning than a species that has evolved to excel at warfare? I activated the final set of recordings, these showing the human crew during their post-combat celebration. Captain Chen was sharing stories with her officers, laughing about tactical decisions made during the heat of battle. The Marine Jackson was demonstrating a combat technique to younger crew members, his movements fluid and precise even in the relaxed environment of the ship's recreation area. They enjoy it, I said quietly. They genuinely enjoy the intellectual and physical challenges of combat. For most species, warfare is a necessary evil, something to be endured for survival or territorial gain. For humans, it appears to be a form of self-expression. As our vessel entered Council space, I began receiving priority communications from the High Command. Word of our mission had reached the upper echelons of government, and there was considerable interest in our findings. I was scheduled to present my preliminary report to the Defense Council within 2 cycles of our arrival. But how could I convey the true implications of what we had discovered? How could I explain that humanity did not simply possess advanced military technology, but had evolved a psychology that made them uniquely suited for prolonged conflicts? The more I considered the situation, the more I realized that our first contact protocols were completely inadequate for dealing with humans. We had approached them as we would any other species, offering trade agreements and cultural exchanges while maintaining our standard military deterrence in the background. What we had failed to understand was that humans would view our military capabilities not as deterrents, but as challenges to be overcome. I spent the final cycles of our journey preparing my report, knowing that the information I was about to share would fundamentally change the Council's approach to human relations. The question was whether that change would come in time to prevent what I was beginning to suspect was an inevitable conflict. Krixtal assisted me in organizing the data files, but I could see that the extended exposure to human combat footage was affecting her psychological state. Her normally bright crystalline features had dimmed considerably, and she had developed a nervous habit of checking the sensor arrays for signs of approaching vessels. "Sir," she said during our final preparation session, "do you believe the humans are aware of how others perceive their combat capabilities?" I considered this question carefully. During our diplomatic interactions, the humans had been remarkably open about their history, sharing stories of conflicts dating back thousands of years. They had spoken casually about wars that had lasted decades, about strategies that had required generations to implement, about technologies developed specifically for the purpose of more efficient destruction. "I believe they are not only aware," I replied, "but that they have been deliberately understating their capabilities during first contact procedures." This realization hit me with the force of a stellar collision. The humans had not been showing off during their combat demonstration. They had been showing restraint. As Council Prime grew larger in our viewport, I made a final addition to my report. Buried within the technical specifications and biometric analysis, I included a personal recommendation that would likely end my career in xenobiological research. I recommended that the Council immediately begin developing protocols for peaceful coexistence with a species that was fundamentally superior in the arts of war, because the alternative was a conflict that we could not possibly win. The Defense Council chambers on Council Prime were designed to intimidate. Towering crystalline walls reflected the light of 7 different suns, creating an atmosphere of ethereal power that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Representatives from 43 species sat in tiered rows, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that normally filled me with pride in our collective achievement. Today, that same diversity filled me with dread as I realized how unprepared we all were for what humanity represented. "Hi." Admiral Thexron of the Corvan Hegemony called the session to order with a resonant bass note that vibrated through the chamber's acoustic dampeners. His forearms gestured toward the central presentation platform where I stood, feeling remarkably small beneath the weight of dozens of alien gazes. Analyst Zefkar, his translated voice boomed through the chamber, "Present your findings regarding human military capabilities." I activated the holographic display systems, and the chamber filled with 3-dimensional representations of the combat demonstration I had witnessed. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably as the human vessel transformed from exploration configuration to combat readiness. "Honorable representatives," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "What you are about to see represents a fundamental miscalculation in our first contact protocols with humanity." The recording began, and I watched as 43 different species experienced the same shock I had felt during the actual demonstration. The Velnari representatives began flickering with distress patterns. The Aquatic Union delegates retreated into their environmental suits, and the proud Corvan military officials leaned forward, with what I recognized as professional interest mixed with concern. When the simulation reached the sequence, where human Marines engaged simulated Krexnor warriors in close combat, Representative Yulthek of the Krexnor Hegemony rose from his position with obvious agitation. "This recording must be corrupted," he declared, his armored carapace gleaming under the chamber lights. "No species could defeat Krexnor warriors using such primitive weaponry and tactics." I paused the recording at the moment when Marine Jackson smiled before charging into combat. "Representative Yulthek, I understand your skepticism. However, all recordings have been verified by 3 independent analysis systems. What you are seeing is an accurate representation of human combat capabilities." High Admiral Thexron gestured for silence as murmurs began spreading through the chamber. "Continue your presentation, analyst. We will address questions at the conclusion." I resumed the recording, providing real-time commentary on the tactical innovations I had observed. "Note how the humans use their ship's positioning to create overlapping fields of fire. This is not a standard defensive formation, but rather an offensive trap designed to channel enemy forces into a killing zone." Representative Mira Sen of the Scientific Union, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy, interjected despite the Admiral's instructions. "What were their casualty projections for this engagement?" "0, I replied, and the chamber fell silent. "Impossible," breathed Counselor Nervak of the Peaceful Worlds Alliance. "No military doctrine can guarantee 0 casualties in combat." I activated a secondary display showing the tactical analysis my computers had performed. The humans calculated a 97% probability of achieving their objectives without losing a single crew member. They were not hoping to minimize casualties. They were planning to eliminate casualties entirely. This statement created an uproar that took several minutes for High Admiral Thexron to quell. I used the time to prepare my most disturbing findings, knowing that what I was about to reveal would change galactic politics forever. Representatives, I continued once order was restored. The combat demonstration I witnessed was not an example of human military doctrine at its peak. According to the crew's own statements, this was a basic training exercise using outdated equipment and conservative tactics. The silence that followed this revelation was more terrifying than the previous uproar. I could see the implications dawning on faces across the chamber as representatives began calculating what humanity's actual military capabilities might look like. Show them the psychological profiles. High Admiral Thexron commanded, his forearms crossed in a gesture I recognized as defensive preparation. I activated the biometric displays, showing the side-by-side comparison of human crew members during diplomatic functions versus combat operations. As you can see, humans do not experience the psychological degradation that affects most species during prolonged combat situations. Their stress responses actually improve their performance rather than hindering it. Representative Kolvash of the Hive Consciousness, whose species had no concept of individual combat, asked the question I had been dreading. Are you suggesting that humans are evolutionarily designed for warfare? Not designed, I corrected. Optimized. Humanity appears to have evolved in an environment where survival required not just the ability to fight, but the ability to excel at fighting. They have developed cognitive patterns that treat warfare as both a survival mechanism and a form of creative expression. I activated the final set of recordings, showing the human crew's casual discussion of military history during our diplomatic dinners. During informal conversations, human crew members referenced conflicts lasting decades, strategies spanning generations, and technological developments driven entirely by military necessity. What other species view as temporary necessities for survival, humans appear to view as permanent aspects of existence. Counselor Nervak's avian features ruffled with agitation. Surely their peaceful first contact overtures indicate a preference for diplomatic solutions. This was the moment I had been preparing for. The conclusion that had cost me sleep for the entire journey back to Council space. Honorable Counselor, I believe human diplomatic overtures represent strategic reconnaissance rather than genuine peaceful intent. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations and demands for clarification. High Admiral Thexron's bass notes cut through the chaos like a blade. Explain that statement, analyst. I brought up a compilation of seemingly innocent questions the humans had asked during our cultural exchanges. Captain Chen inquired about Council military structures, asking what she termed academic questions about our defensive capabilities, supply lines, and command hierarchies. When I reviewed these questions in light of human military doctrine, I realized she was conducting a comprehensive threat assessment. Representative Yulthek stood again, his posture now clearly aggressive. Are you accusing humanity of espionage activities? No, Representative. I am suggesting that humans conduct intelligence gathering as naturally as other species conduct small talk. It is not deliberate deception, but rather an instinctive behavior pattern developed through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. I activated my final display, showing a tactical analysis of Council space from a human perspective. Using the information gathered during seemingly casual diplomatic conversations, my computers have projected how humans would likely approach a military conflict with the Council. The results are concerning. The holographic display showed attack vectors that exploited weaknesses in our defensive posture that we had not even realized existed, trade routes that could be disrupted to create supply shortages, communication relays that could be targeted to fragment our command structure, and defensive positions that could be bypassed entirely using tactics we had never considered. How long would such a conflict last? High Admiral Thexron asked, his voice carefully neutral. Assuming humans deployed only the capabilities we directly observed, I replied. Approximately 6 standard months for complete Council military collapse. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that I could hear the environmental systems cycling air through the filtration units. 43 species, representing thousands of worlds and trillions of beings, contemplated the implications of a force they had welcomed with open arms, now revealing itself as an existential threat. Finally, Representative Mirasen asked the question that everyone was thinking. What do you recommend, Analyst Zefkar? I had prepared for this moment, knowing that my answer would either prevent a catastrophic war or ensure my exile from civilized space. I recommend immediate and unconditional surrender, The chaos that followed my statement lasted for over an hour. The word surrender had never been spoken in the Defense Council chambers. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, the concept had been considered so fundamentally impossible that most languages lacked a direct translation. The chaos that erupted following my recommendation threatened to tear apart the very foundations of our political system. Representative. Yulthek's challenge roar echoed off the crystalline walls as he activated his species' aggressive display patterns. The Krexnor hegemony will never yield to any species regardless of their combat capabilities. High Admiral Thexeron's forearms moved in rapid sequence, triggering emergency protocols that sealed the chamber and activated sonic dampeners to prevent the proceedings from being broadcast to the general population. Order! We will have order in this chamber! I stood at the center of the maelstrom, watching as thousands of years of galactic politics began to unravel. The Peaceful Worlds Alliance huddled together in defensive formations, while the more militant species began forming what looked suspiciously like combat groups. The Scientific Union representatives retreated to their environmental barriers, and the Hive Consciousness delegates simply disconnected from the proceedings entirely. Analyst Zefkar, High Admiral Thexeron's voice cut through the diminishing chaos. Elaborate on your recommendation. The term surrender requires clarification. I activated my personal shield generator, a precaution that proved wise as several representatives had begun making threatening gestures in my direction. Honorable Admiral, I am not recommending military surrender in the traditional sense. I am recommending preventive capitulation to avoid a conflict we cannot win. Counselor Nervak's feathers had flattened against her skull in a display of extreme distress. You speak of surrender before any hostilities have occurred. Have the humans issued demands or ultimatums? No, Counselor. That is precisely what makes them so dangerous. I activated a new set of displays showing human historical records. Humanity's military history spans over 5,000 years of continuous warfare. They have refined the art of conflict to a degree that other species use for scientific advancement or cultural development. The holographic displays showed human conflicts across their planet's surface, from primitive tribal warfare to the devastating global conflicts that had nearly destroyed their civilization before they achieved spaceflight. Observe the pattern of escalation. Humans do not simply fight to achieve objectives. They fight to completely eliminate threats to their survival. Representative Kolvash's hive mind patterns flickered with confusion. Are you suggesting they would attempt genocide? Not genocide, I corrected, feeling my exoskeleton plates contracting with stress. Total victory. Humans appear to have no concept of limited warfare or acceptable casualties among enemy forces. When they fight to achieve absolute dominance. I brought up the most disturbing piece of evidence I had discovered. During casual conversation, Captain Chen mentioned something called the Geneva Conventions, which she described as human attempts to limit the destructiveness of warfare. When I researched these conventions, I discovered they were created in response to weapons and tactics so devastating that humans themselves considered them excessive. The chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed this information. Finally, High Admiral Thexeron asked the question I had been dreading. What types of weapons did humans consider excessive? I activated classified files that I had obtained through channels I preferred not to discuss. Chemical weapons designed to cause prolonged suffering, biological agents capable of rendering planets uninhabitable for centuries, and nuclear devices with yield sufficient to crack planetary crusts. Representative Mirason's tentacles had turned pale with shock. And they banned these weapons voluntarily? No, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. They banned them from use against other humans. The conventions contain no restrictions on their use against what they term non-human threats. The implications of this revelation sent waves of panic through the chamber. Species that had considered themselves apex predators suddenly realized they might be little more than prey in the eyes of humanity. How do you know humans would classify us as threats? Counselor Nervak asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. I brought up recordings from our diplomatic dinners, focusing on seemingly innocent conversations about galactic politics. Captain Chen asked detailed questions about territorial disputes between council members, resource allocation conflicts, and historical military engagements. When analyzed from a strategic perspective, these questions constitute a comprehensive assessment of Council military weaknesses and internal divisions. High Admiral Thexeron's posture had shifted from authoritative to defensive. Could these inquiries have been genuine scientific curiosity? Possible, but unlikely. I activated a comparison analysis showing similar questions asked by human diplomatic teams across 12 different first contact scenarios. Humans follow consistent patterns of information gathering that focus on military capabilities, resource dependencies, and political fault lines. This is not casual curiosity. This is systematic intelligence collection. The chamber's environmental systems struggled to process the increased stress pheromones being released by multiple species simultaneously. Emergency ventilation activated, creating a low hum that underscored the growing tension. Representative Yulthek stepped forward, his armored form imposing even among the diverse assembly. You speak of human capabilities, but you have provided no evidence that they intend aggression. Perhaps their military focus is purely defensive. I had prepared for this objection, though I hoped it would not be necessary to reveal my most damning evidence. Representative Yulthek, I discovered something during my analysis that I have not yet shared with this assembly. I activated my personal recording device, playing back a conversation I had overheard during our final diplomatic dinner. The translation systems rendered Captain Chen's voice with perfect clarity as she spoke to her tactical officer about Council defensive capabilities. The key weaknesses there, decentralized command structure, her recorded voice said. Take out the communication relays and you fragment their response capabilities. Their defensive doctrine assumes threats will follow established warfare patterns. We could have them defeated before they realize they were under attack. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. 43 species sat in stunned silence as they processed the implications of humanity's casual discussion of Council conquest. This conversation, High Admiral Thexeron said slowly, suggests active planning for aggressive action. No, Admiral, I replied, feeling the weight of my next words. This conversation suggests that humans cannot help but analyze potential threats and develop counter-strategies. It is not active planning. It is involuntary tactical assessment. They evaluate every species they encounter as either ally or enemy, and they prepare for both possibilities simultaneously. Counselor Nervak's voice was barely audible when she spoke. If this is true, then peaceful coexistence may be impossible. Not impossible, I corrected. But it requires accepting a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. Humans will become the dominant military force in this sector, regardless of our preferences. The question is whether that transition occurs through negotiation or conquest. I activated my final presentation, showing projections for both scenarios. If we attempt to contain or challenge human expansion, we face a conflict we cannot win using conventional military doctrine. If we accept their dominance and negotiate favorable terms for Council member species, we might preserve our civilizations in a subordinate role. Representative Yulthek's challenge posture had not diminished, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. You ask us to surrender our independence based on potential threats rather than actual aggression. I ask you to acknowledge reality, I replied. Humanity represents an evolutionary achievement in warfare that we cannot match. Attempting to compete with them militarily would be like challenging a stellar collision with personal shield generators. High Admiral Thexeron rose from his position, his forearms moving in complex patterns that indicated deep contemplation. This assembly will recess for deliberation. Analyst Zefkar, you will remain available for additional questions. As representatives filed out of the chamber in small groups, their conversations hushed and urgent, I realized that the consequences of my testimony were only beginning to unfold. I had potentially prevented a catastrophic war, but I had also shattered the illusion of council, supremacy that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. The question now was whether the truth would prove more destructive than the war I was trying to prevent. The 3 cycles following my testimony became known as the silent period in council records, though silence was the last thing anyone experienced. Behind closed doors, 43 species engaged in the most intense political negotiations in galactic history. While publicly maintaining the facade that nothing had changed, I spent those cycles confined to a secure facility on Council Prime, officially for my own protection, but effectively under house arrest. My testimony had made me either the most important analyst in galactic history or a traitor to every civilization in known space, depending on which representative you asked. My quarters were comfortable but monitored, with guards from 3 different species ensuring that I could neither escape nor be eliminated by factions that disagreed with my recommendations. The irony was not lost on me that I required protection from the very species I was trying to save. On the morning of the 4th cycle, Crystal arrived with disturbing news from the intelligence networks. "Analyst Zefkar," she said, her crystalline features dim with worry. "There have been developments you need to know about." I gestured for her to continue, noting that her usual bright demeanor had been replaced by something approaching panic. "The Krexnor hegemony has mobilized their battle fleets," she reported. "Representative. Yulthek convinced his military council that humanity represents an immediate threat that must be eliminated before they can establish a foothold in our sector." My sensory stalks drooped with despair. This was exactly the scenario I had hoped to prevent. "How large is the mobilization?" 700 vessels, including their newest dreadnoughts. They plan to strike human space before the Council reaches a consensus on diplomatic approaches. Krixtal's body flickered with distress patterns. "Analyst, they believe they can achieve a quick victory if they act before humans can prepare their defenses." I activated my personal communication array, requesting an immediate audience with High Admiral Thexron. The response came back within minutes. The Admiral would see me in 1 hour. The Defense Council chambers had been reconfigured for emergency sessions, with additional security measures and real-time communication links to military commands across Council space. High Admiral Thexron stood at the Central Command platform, his forearms manipulating holographic displays showing ship movements throughout the sector. "Analyst Zefkar," he acknowledged as I entered. "I assume you are aware of recent developments?" "Yes, Admiral. I believe the Krexnor hegemony is about to make a catastrophic mistake." "Explain." His tone was clipped, efficient, focused on immediate tactical concerns rather than long-term strategic implications. I activated my analysis computers, projecting scenarios based on human capabilities I had observed. The Krexnor are approaching this as a conventional preemptive strike. They assume that surprise and overwhelming force will achieve rapid victory before humans can organize effective resistance. That is standard military doctrine for dealing with emerging threats, the Admiral observed. Standard doctrine assumes the enemy follows predictable response patterns, I countered. Humans do not. I brought up tactical analyses showing how humans had historically responded to surprise attacks. When humans are attacked without warning, they do not follow conventional defensive strategies. They immediately transition to what they term total war protocols. The Elko holographic displays showed human conflicts, where initial defeats had been transformed into complete victory through tactics that other species would consider excessive or impossible to maintain. "Admiral, if the Krexnor attack human space, they will not face a defensive response. They will face a counterattack designed to eliminate the Krexnor civilization entirely." High Admiral Thexron's forearms paused in their manipulation of the displays. "Are you suggesting humans would attempt to destroy an entire species over a single military engagement?" "I am suggesting humans view any attack on their territory as an existential threat requiring total elimination of the attacking force." I activated recordings from human historical archives. They have a saying, "The best defense is a good offense." When threatened, humans do not seek to repel attacks. They seek to remove the source of threats permanently. The Admiral studied the tactical projections with growing concern. How quickly could humans mobilize such a response? Based on their demonstrated capabilities, I estimate they could launch counterstrikes within 6 standard hours of the initial Krexnor attack. I highlighted human ship configurations that could rapidly transition from exploration to combat roles. "Admiral, every human vessel in space is potentially a warship. Their civilian fleet could be militarized faster than the Krexnor can reach human territory." A priority communication alert interrupted our discussion. High Admiral Thexron accepted the transmission, and the face of Representative Yulthek appeared in the holographic display. "Admiral," the Krexnor representative announced, "our fleets have entered human space. First contact with human defensive forces has been established. I expect to report complete victory within 2 cycles." The transmission ended before the Admiral could respond, leaving us staring at the empty display with growing dread. How long until we know the outcome? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Krexnor communication protocols require status reports every 6 hours during combat operations, the Admiral replied. If Representative Yolthek's predictions are accurate, we should receive confirmation of human defeat within 12 hours. I spent those 12 hours in a state of anticipation that bordered on physical illness. My analysis of human capabilities suggested that the Krexnor had just initiated a conflict that would reshape galactic civilization, but there remained a small possibility that I had overestimated human military potential. When the first reports arrived, they confirmed my worst fears. The Krexnor fleet had encountered human vessels at the edge of their territorial space, exactly as planned. The initial engagement had proceeded according to standard military doctrine, with Krexnor dreadnoughts establishing superior positions and demanding human surrender. Then everything had gone wrong. The human vessels had not responded with defensive formations or retreat protocols. Instead, they had immediately launched coordinated attacks using weapons and tactics that the Krexnor had never encountered. Within the first hour of combat, the Krexnor had lost 30% of their fleet to weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear before counterattacks could be launched. But the reports that followed were even more disturbing. Human reinforcements had not come from their home systems as expected. They had emerged from locations throughout Krexnor space, suggesting that humans had already infiltrated deep into enemy territory before the conflict began. The defensive battle was revealing itself to be an elaborately prepared trap that the Krexnor had walked into willingly. By the 18th hour, Representative Yolthek's confident predictions had become desperate pleas for council intervention. Admiral, his transmitted voice carried none of its earlier authority, human forces have broken through our defensive perimeter. They are not targeting military installations exclusively. They appear to be systematically destroying our industrial infrastructure. I watched High Admiral Thexron process this information with growing alarm. The implications extended far beyond a single military engagement. Humans were not simply defeating the Krexnor. They were dismantling their civilization's ability to wage war. Representative Yolthek, the Admiral responded, "What assistance do you require?" The response took several minutes to arrive, and when it came, it carried the sound of weapon fire in the background. "Admiral, we surrender, unconditionally. The Krexnor hegemony formally requests council mediation for immediate cessation of hostilities." The transmission ended in static, leaving us staring at displays showing the collapse of one of the galaxy's most formidable military powers in less than one standard cycle. "High Admiral." Thexron turned to me with an expression I had never seen on a Corvan face before. "Genuine fear. Analyst Zefkar," he said quietly, "it appears your recommendations regarding human capabilities were conservative rather than alarmist." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction in being proven correct. "Admiral, the Krexnor engagement was not a demonstration of human military supremacy. It was a warning. Humans have just announced to the galaxy that resistance to their expansion will result in complete destruction. As emergency communications flooded in from across Council space, I realized that the consequences of witnessing humans in combat had extended far beyond my personal suffering. I had tried to prevent a war through surrender, but the Krexnor had chosen combat instead. Now the galaxy would learn what I had discovered through observation. Humanity was not just another species seeking a place among the stars. They were the species that would determine whether any other civilization would be allowed to keep their place among the stars. The age of human dominance had begun, and it had started with the sound of Krexnor surrender. The human response to Krexnor surrender arrived 3 hours after Representative Yolthek's desperate transmission, and it changed everything I thought I understood about human nature. Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared in the council chambers through priority diplomatic channels, her expression carrying the same warm professionalism I remembered from our cultural exchanges. Behind her I could see the bridge of her vessel, and nothing in the environment suggested they had just completed the systematic destruction of a galactic power. "High Admiral Thexron," she said with a slight smile. "I understand the Council wishes to discuss recent events in Krexnor space. We are prepared to participate in mediation talks." High Admiral Thexron's forearms moved in complex patterns that indicated barely controlled stress. Captain Chen, our understanding is that hostilities between human and Krexnor forces are ongoing. Oh no, Admiral, Captain Chen replied, her tone suggesting mild confusion. Hostilities ended when Representative Yultek transmitted his surrender. We immediately ceased all military operations and began providing humanitarian assistance to disabled Krexnor vessels. I felt my exoskeleton plates contracting involuntarily. The casual manner in which she described the transition from total warfare to humanitarian aid was more unsettling than the destruction itself. Captain, I interjected, unable to contain my need for clarification, your forces achieved complete victory in 18 standard hours. How is such rapid conquest possible? Captain Chen's expression brightened with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at seeing me again. Analyst Zefkar, I hoped you would be involved in these discussions. You ask an excellent question. She activated holographic displays showing the Krexnor engagement from the human perspective. The Krexnor approached this as a surprise attack, but they made several fundamental miscalculations. First, they assumed our vessels were operating independently rather than as components of an integrated defense network. The tactical displays revealed the true scope of human preparation. What the Krexnor had interpreted as scattered civilian vessels had actually been a coordinated military deployment, spanning multiple star systems. Second, Captain Chen continued, they assumed our response would be limited to the forces present in the initial engagement zone. They did not account for our rapid deployment capabilities. The displays showed human reinforcements arriving through what appeared to be impossible vectors, suggesting either faster-than-light travel beyond Council capabilities or pre-positioned assets throughout Krexnor space. Captain, High Admiral Thexron interrupted, are you stating that human forces were already positioned within Krexnor territory before hostilities began? Not positioned, Admiral. Distributed. Captain Chen's smile never wavered. Humanity maintains exploration and research assets throughout this sector. When threatened, these assets can rapidly transition to defensive roles. I realized with growing horror that Captain Chen was describing a military deployment strategy that made every human civilian vessel a potential weapon platform. The implications for galactic security were staggering. How many human vessels are currently in Council space? I asked, though I suspected I would not like the answer. Captain Chen consulted a display that appeared in front of her. Currently, we have approximately 12,000 vessels engaged in various exploration, research, and diplomatic activities throughout Council territory. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. 12,000 vessels meant that humans had more military assets in Council space than the Council maintained for its own defense. Representative Yultek's image appeared on an emergency channel, his armored form showing visible damage from recent combat. Captain Chen, the Krexnor hegemony formally requests clarification of surrender terms. Representative Yultek, Captain Chen's tone shifted to something more formal but equally warm. Humanity has no interest in territorial conquest or political domination. We simply require assurance that no further attacks will be launched against human interests. What assurances do you require? Representative Yultek asked, his voice carrying the strain of a leader whose military power had been completely eliminated. Standard non-aggression protocols, Captain Chen replied. Formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty, establishment of trade relations under fair market conditions, and participation in joint scientific research initiatives. I felt my understanding of human psychology fragmenting as I processed these terms. After demonstrating the capability to eliminate an entire civilization, humans were requesting trade agreements and research partnerships. Captain Chen, I said carefully, these terms seem remarkably generous given the circumstances. Her expression showed genuine confusion. Why would they be otherwise, analyst? The Krexnor made a mistake based on incomplete information. Once they understood the situation, they made the rational choice to cease hostilities. Punishment serves no constructive purpose. High Admiral Thexron leaned forward, his forearms positioned in a gesture of intense focus. Captain, your forces demonstrated the capability to completely destroy Krexnor civilization. Why did you stop at military defeat? Admiral, Captain Chen replied, her tone suggesting the question was somehow inappropriate. The Krexnor are not our enemies. They were potential enemies who chose to become actual enemies and then chose to stop being enemies. destroying them after their surrender, would serve no strategic or ethical purpose. This casual dismissal of total victory in favor of negotiated settlement represented a fundamental disconnect from every military doctrine I had studied. Humans had achieved absolute dominance and then voluntarily limited their own advantage. "Captain," Representative Yulthek interjected, "what guarantees can you provide that human forces will not take advantage of Krexnor military weakness?" "The same guarantees we have always provided," Captain Chen responded immediately. "Humanity has no interest in ruling other species. We prefer trading partners to subjects, research collaborators to vassals, and allies to conquered territories." I found myself speaking before I realized I had formed the words. But what prevents other species from perceiving human capabilities as threatening? Captain Chen's expression showed the first sign of concern since the conversation began. "That is an excellent question, analyst. How do we address the fear that our defensive capabilities create among potential partners?" The question was directed at me, but its implications extended to every species in council space. Humans had just demonstrated that they could eliminate any threat to their interests with devastating efficiency, and then immediately returned to offering friendship and cooperation. "Perhaps," High Admiral Thexron suggested slowly, "a formal framework for human military capabilities within council space would address these concerns." "We would welcome such discussions," Captain Chen replied enthusiastically. "Humanity believes that transparency reduces the likelihood of misunderstandings that lead to unnecessary conflicts." As the session continued, I began to understand that my analysis of human psychology had been both completely accurate and fundamentally flawed. Humans were indeed evolutionarily optimized for warfare, but they had also developed cultural mechanisms that prevented their military capabilities from automatically translating into aggressive expansion. They were predators who had chosen to become protectors, warriors who preferred peace, and conquerors who actively avoided conquest. The consequences of witnessing humans in combat had taught me that the most dangerous species in the galaxy might also be the most benevolent, and that distinction made them more unsettling than any conventional threat. Captain Chen concluded the session with an invitation that perfectly encapsulated human complexity. "Representatives, humanity would like to extend formal invitations for cultural and scientific exchanges. We believe that better understanding between our species will prevent future misunderstandings." After witnessing the systematic destruction of Krexnor military power, humans were requesting dinner parties and research collaborations. As the transmission ended, I realized that the galaxy was not facing conquest by a superior military force. It was facing integration with a species that had weaponized cooperation itself. 6 months after the Krexnor incident, as historians would eventually name it, I found myself aboard a human research vessel conducting joint xenobiological studies in the Andorian Nebula. The irony of my situation was not lost on me. The species I had once recommended surrendering to had invited me to become their partner in scientific exploration. The USS Discovery was a marvel of human engineering that perfectly embodied the contradictions I had struggled to understand about their species. The same vessel that could deploy devastating weapons at a moment's notice was equipped with the most advanced biological research laboratories I had ever encountered. Scientists from 17 different species worked alongside human researchers, sharing discoveries and developing technologies that benefited the entire galactic community. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's xenobiological specialist, had become my research partner and, surprisingly, something approaching a friend. Her enthusiasm for alien life forms was infectious, and her casual attitude toward the ship's military capabilities initially disturbed me until I realized it was completely genuine. "Zefkar," she said as we reviewed data from our latest specimen collection, "you still get that look sometimes when security drills are conducted. Are you concerned about something?" I paused in my analysis of a fascinating crystalline organism we had discovered on Kepler 442c. Even after months of direct collaboration, I found it difficult to articulate my ongoing confusion about human nature. "Dr. Rodriguez, I have observed this crew transition from peaceful research to combat readiness in under 30 seconds. How do you reconcile such rapid psychological changes?" She leaned back in her chair, considering my question with the serious attention humans gave to matters they considered important. I think you're still viewing this as a psychological change rather than a practical one. When we shift to combat mode, we're not becoming different people, we're using different skills. But the intensity of focus, the tactical precision, the apparent enjoyment of combat scenarios, oh that, she laughed, and the sound still carried the warm humanity that had made their species so appealing during first contact. Zefkar, humans enjoy challenges. Combat is simply one type of challenge, like solving a complex research problem or navigating a diplomatic crisis. The satisfaction comes from applying our abilities effectively, not from causing harm. This explanation helped, but it did not address my deeper concerns about the consequences of my testimony to the Defense Council. Dr. Rodriguez, do you believe galactic civilization has been improved by humanity's integration into Council space? She activated a holographic display showing current political maps of the sector. Look at the data, Zefkar. How many interspecies conflicts have occurred in the 6 months since the Krexnor incident? I reviewed the statistical analysis with growing amazement. There have been no military conflicts between Council member species since everyone realized that starting wars in a galaxy containing humans was counterproductive, she finished. The Krexnor incident demonstrated that we respond to aggression with overwhelming force. But it also demonstrated that we prefer peaceful resolution when possible. The implications of this unintended consequence had been debated extensively in Council chambers. Human military dominance had not led to conquest or subjugation, but rather to the most peaceful period in recorded galactic history. Species that had maintained territorial disputes for centuries had suddenly discovered diplomatic solutions when the alternative was potential human intervention. But what about autonomy? I asked. Species that once considered themselves sovereign powers now modify their behavior based on potential human responses. Is that different from modifying behavior based on any other consequence? Dr. Rodriguez challenged. Before humans arrived, species modified their behavior to avoid conflicts with the Krexnor, or to maintain trade relations with the Scientific Union, or to prevent economic sanctions from the Aquatic Alliance. Humans simply became another factor in political calculations. She activated additional displays showing trade volumes, scientific collaboration rates, and cultural exchange programs. The difference is that human influence encourages cooperation rather than competition. Species that work together receive human support for their projects. Species that create conflicts receive human attention, which they have learned to avoid. I had to admit the data supported her argument. Human integration had created what amounted to enforced peace through superior military capability, but that peace had allowed unprecedented cooperation between species that had previously viewed each other as rivals or threats. Dr. Rodriguez, I must ask a personal question. Do humans understand the fear they inspire in other species? Her expression grew more serious. Of course we do, Zefkar. That's exactly why we work so hard to demonstrate our peaceful intentions through actions rather than words. We invite other species to participate in our research. We share our technological discoveries. We provide assistance during natural disasters and medical emergencies. She gestured toward the diverse crew working throughout the research vessel. Every human ship in Council space carries mixed crews specifically to demonstrate that we view other species as partners, rather than subjects. We could operate these vessels with entirely human crews, but we choose integration because it builds trust. This revelation provided another piece of the puzzle I had been struggling to solve. Human behavior that I had interpreted as natural cooperation was actually deliberate policy designed to mitigate the fear their capabilities inspired. So humans are aware of their effect on galactic politics? Intensely aware, she confirmed. Human leadership spends considerable effort managing our integration to avoid triggering the kind of fear-based conflicts that would force us to use our military capabilities more extensively. A communication alert interrupted our conversation, and Captain Chen's voice filled the laboratory through the ship's internal systems. All hands, we have received a distress signal from a Scientific Union vessel in the Proxima system. They report engine failure and life support problems in a region with no nearby rescue assets. Dr. Rodriguez was already moving toward the equipment lockers before the announcement finished. Duty call, Zefkar. Want to see human crisis response in action? I followed her to the bridge where the transformation I had witnessed months ago during combat simulation was occurring again. The crew moved with fluid precision, their casual research personas shifting into focused professionals capable of complex coordination under pressure. Navigation, plot course for Proxima System, maximum sustainable velocity, Captain Chen ordered. Medical, prepare for potential casualty treatment. Engineering, prep the emergency tow package. The entire ship reconfigured itself from research platform to rescue vessel in under 10 minutes. I watched human crew members work alongside alien colleagues with seamless cooperation, their earlier casual interactions replaced by efficient professional communication. Dr. Rodriguez, I said as we prepared rescue equipment. This response demonstrates the same intensity I observed during combat scenarios. Exactly, she replied without slowing her preparation work. That's what I meant about humans enjoying challenges. Whether we're fighting hostile forces or saving lives, we apply the same level of focus and capability. The satisfaction comes from using our abilities effectively to achieve positive outcomes. As the USS Discovery raced toward the distressed Scientific Union vessel, I realized that my understanding of the consequences of witnessing humans in combat had been incomplete. I had focused on their capacity for destruction while overlooking their equal capacity for preservation and protection. The fear I had experienced, and that I had transmitted to the Council, was based on recognizing human military supremacy without understanding human moral development. They had evolved to excel at warfare, but they had also evolved to choose when and how to apply that excellence. Watching the human crew coordinate a complex rescue operation with the same enthusiasm they brought to research and the same precision they applied to combat, I finally understood what made humanity so unsettling to other species. They did not fit into any of the categories that galactic civilization used to classify and predict behavior. They were warriors who preferred peace, predators who protected their prey, and conquerors who chose cooperation. The consequences of witnessing humans in combat had indeed changed my life, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of suffering from exposure to their destructive capabilities, I had discovered the complex psychology of a species that had learned to balance immense power with equally immense responsibility. As we reached the disabled Scientific Union vessel and began rescue operations, I realized that humanity had not conquered galactic civilization. They had simply given it a new framework for understanding what was possible when superior capability was guided by cooperative intentions. The galaxy was safer because humans were dangerous, and that paradox would continue to challenge my understanding for the rest of my life.